Parents pressured me to relinquish my master bedroom in the house I pay for their golden boy. Some people say family is everything. But what happens when your family thinks they're entitled to everything you own? I worked my entire life to build my future. I put in long hours as a software engineer, saved every penny I could, and finally, at 26 years old, I bought my first home. A beautiful 3-bedroom house in a quiet neighborhood. It was supposed to be my safe space. But the moment my retired parents moved in, they started treating it like it was theirs. And when my golden child brother and his pregnant wife came into the picture, they tried to take it away from me completely. At first, having my parents live with me wasn't a big deal. They were both retired and on a fixed income, and since I had extra space, I figured, why not? They didn't pay rent. They didn't contribute to groceries or bills. But I let it slide because they were my parents. And for a while, everything was fine. Until my older brother Jake and his wife Emma decided to move to the city. And suddenly, my home wasn't mine anymore. It all started with a family dinner. We were sitting at the table when my mom casually said, "Oh, by the way, Jake and Emma will be moving in with us next month." I nearly choked on my food. Wait, what? My dad nodded, as if this was a completely normal thing to do. Yeah, they need time to save up before getting their own place. I blinked. Where exactly are they staying? My mother waved a hand like it was no big deal. The guest room, of course. I set down my fork, trying to control my temper. So you just made this decision without asking me? She gave me a sweet but condescending smile. Sweetheart, it's not a big deal. It's family. But it was a big deal. Because this was my house. I was the one paying the mortgage, the bills, and every expense that kept this place running. And now, without even asking me, they were letting another 2 people move in for free. Jake and Emma moved in, and immediately, things went downhill. They didn't offer to help with anything. Not groceries. Not utilities. Not even cleaning up after themselves. Emma would leave dishes in the sink for days, waiting for me or my mom to wash them. Jake would blast the TV at full volume in the living room while I was trying to work. And worst of all, they acted like they were doing me a favor by being there. It didn't take long before Emma started making comments. At first, they were subtle. Wow, this master bedroom is so nice. I bet it would be perfect for a nursery. Then, she got bolder. You know, it makes sense for us to take the master bedroom. We're going to have a baby, and we need the space more than you do. I laughed, thinking she was joking, but then I noticed my parents weren't laughing. Instead, my mom nodded in agreement. She has a point, she said. You don't really need all that space, do you? I felt my stomach drop, because I could already see where this was going. That night, my mom sat me down for a serious conversation. She looked at me with that fake sweet expression, the one she always used when she wanted something. Listen, honey, Jake and Emma are about to start a family. Don't you think they deserve the master bedroom? I stared at her in disbelief. Mom, this is my house. She sighed like I was being difficult. I know, but you're young. You don't need all that space. It's just logical. I clenched my jaw, trying to stay calm. No, I bought this house. I pay for everything. I am not giving up my room. Her lips pressed into a thin line. So you're really going to be this selfish? Selfish. For not wanting to give up my own bedroom in my own house. That was the moment I knew. This wasn't just about a room. This was about control. And if I didn't set boundaries now, they were going to take everything from me. I thought my firm refusal would be the end of it. I thought my parents would say, "All right, we tried. Let's move on." But instead, they doubled down. And suddenly, I wasn't just a homeowner. I was the villain in my own house. The day after I refused to give up my master bedroom, my mother acted like I had personally betrayed her. She barely spoke to me. She didn't make me a plate at dinner. She sighed dramatically every time she walked past me. And then, at breakfast, she laid it on thick. "I just don't understand how you can be so heartless," she muttered, stirring her coffee. I didn't respond. She kept going. "Jake and Emma are struggling, and all you care about is keeping your fancy room." I set down my fork. "Mom, it's not about a fancy room. It's about the fact that this is my house, and I get to have my own space." Jake, who had been pretending not to listen, scoffed from across the table. Man, you act like we're asking you to move into the garage. It's just a room. I turned to him, keeping my voice calm but firm. If it's just a room, then why can't you take the guest room? Silence. And then Emma chimed in, rubbing her pregnant belly dramatically. Because we're about to have a baby. Don't you think a child deserves to grow up in the best space possible? I clenched my jaw. Then get your own house. Emma gasped like I had just slapped her. Jake muttered, wow, selfish. And my mom? She just shook her head and said, I raised you better than this. After that conversation, things in the house got worse. Suddenly, my parents weren't just ignoring me. They were actively trying to punish me. My food started disappearing from the fridge. The thermostat kept getting changed without my permission. I'd come home from work to find Emma resting in my recliner, acting like she owned the place. And the worst part? Whenever I called them out, they acted like I was overreacting. You're imagining things. You're just being paranoid. Emma's pregnant. Can't you be a little more accommodating? It felt like I was losing control of my own home. And then, one day, I walked through the front door and found my entire bedroom emptied out into the hallway. I stood there, staring at my suitcases, clothes, furniture, and personal items piled in the hallway. And then I heard it. Emma's giggles come from my bedroom. I stormed down the hall, pushed open the door, and there she was, standing in front of my walk-in closet, admiring her clothes hanging inside. Jake was leaning against my dresser, looking at his phone like he had no care in the world. Emma turned to me, smirking. Your mom said we could move in today. Isn't this great? I felt my blood boil. Get out. Jake rolled his eyes. Dude, don't be dramatic. It's just a room. I stepped forward, my voice low and dangerous. No, this is MY house. And you two just made the biggest mistake of your lives. I stood there, staring at my own belongings scattered in the hallway. My bed, my clothes, my personal things, dumped like trash so that my freeloading brother and his wife could take over. And the worst part? They didn't even look sorry. Emma just stood in front of my closet, smiling like she had won some kind of prize. Jake leaned against my dresser, scrolling on his phone, acting like this was completely normal. And my parents? They weren't even hiding their favoritism anymore. They had chosen their golden boy over me. And that was the moment I snapped. Get out. Emma blinked, tilting her head like she hadn't heard me. What? Get out of my room. Now. Jake groaned, running a hand through his hair. Bro, you're being ridiculous. We have a baby on the way. What do you need this much space for? I turned to my parents, who were standing in the hallway, arms crossed, looking annoyed. Did you seriously approve this? I asked. My mother sighed dramatically. Honey, it just makes sense. You don't have kids. They do. They need the space more than you. I let out a bitter laugh. Wow. So that's how it is? You think you can just take my house and rearrange it however you want? Jake rolled his eyes. Dude, stop acting like we stole something. You're being childish. Emma let out a fake, exasperated sigh. You're making such a big deal out of this. It's not like we're asking you to sleep outside. I turned back to them, my voice low but firm. Move my stuff back, or you can all pack your bags and leave. Silence. Then my mother lost it. You're kicking your family out over a room? I crossed my arms. No, Mom. I'm kicking you out because you don't respect me or my home. Jake stepped forward, his face red with rage. You don't mean that. I smiled. I do. Then I pulled out my phone and started typing up an eviction notice. Jake's eyes widened. Wait, what the hell are you doing? Making it official, I said coldly. You have 30 days. Pack your stuff. My mother started crying. Sweetheart, you don't mean this. We're family. Emma's jaw dropped. You can't just throw a pregnant woman out. I turned to her, my patience completely gone. Watch me. That night, the phone calls started. My aunts, uncles, cousins, everyone was calling me. Because, of course, my mother had called the entire extended family to tell them I was cruelly throwing my pregnant sister-in-law onto the streets. But what she conveniently left out was that I was paying for everything. I owned the house. They tried to steal my bedroom behind my back. So when I explained the full story, most of my family members sided with me. Some even cut off my parents and Jake for their entitlement. But my parents? They still refused to admit they were wrong. And the final straw came when I found out what they did next. I was at work when I got a notification from my bank. A mortgage inquiry. Confused, I checked the details and saw that my parents had tried to refinance my home under their names. They had actually gone to the bank and tried to convince them that I was gifting the house to them. I was livid. And the second I got home, I walked in and threw the eviction notices onto the kitchen table. "You tried to steal my house," I said, my voice shaking with anger. My father looked guilty. My mother? She just shrugged. "You're being so dramatic." That was it. They were gone. I thought kicking them out would be the end of it. I thought once they realized I wasn't backing down, they would accept their fate and leave quietly. But instead, they went nuclear. And suddenly, I wasn't just the bad guy in their eyes. I was the villain of the entire family. The day after I handed them the official eviction notices, my mother got to work. She called every single relative she could. And by that night, I was getting dozens of texts and voicemails from angry family members. "How could you do this to your own mother? She raised you, and this is how you repay her? Throwing your pregnant sister-in-law onto the streets? What kind of person does that?" The best part? They all acted like I was kicking out a sweet old lady and a helpless couple with nowhere to go. Like my parents weren't living rent-free in the house I paid for. Like Jake and Emma weren't fully capable adults who just didn't want to pay for their own place. It was infuriating. A week after the eviction notice, my mother tried one last desperate move. She called me, sobbing hysterically. "I just got back from the doctor," she gasped. "They said my blood pressure is dangerously high. All this stress, it's killing me." I sighed, rubbing my temples. "Mom, if you're stressed, it's because of your own actions." She sniffled. "How can you be so cold to your own mother? After everything I've done for you? Mom, I love you, but I'm done being manipulated. You have 2 weeks left to move out." Silence. Then, in a completely normal voice, she said, "Fine, but don't expect us to forgive you." And just like that, the tears were gone, because they had never been real to begin with. After my parents realized I wasn't giving in, the mood in the house got ugly. They stopped speaking to me completely. They refused to cook for me anymore. And weirdly, my food kept disappearing from the fridge overnight. Then, one night, I came home later than usual. And when I walked through the door, I noticed something was off. The house was too quiet. The lights were dimmed. And then, I stepped into the living room and felt something crunch under my feet. I looked down, and my heart dropped, because the floor was covered in broken glass. My TV? Smashed. My laptop? Gone. My furniture? Flipped over. My parents and Jake had completely trashed my house. I took one deep breath. Then I called the police. Because this wasn't just entitlement anymore. This was destruction of property. When the cops arrived, my parents played dumb. "We don't know what happened. Maybe someone broke in?" Jake even had the audacity to shrug and say, "Well, maybe you should have been home to stop it." But they didn't expect one thing. I had security cameras, and when the officers checked the footage, there they were, my own family destroying my home. That was the final straw. After the police report was filed, I moved up their eviction date. Instead of giving them 2 weeks, I gave them 1. And when the day finally arrived, I changed the locks at exactly noon. Jake and Emma were already gone. They had scrambled to find an apartment at the last second. But my parents? They stood outside, staring at me like I was a stranger. My mother's voice was low, angry. "I hope you're happy. You've ruined this family." I met her gaze, feeling nothing. "No, Mom. I just finally put myself first." Then I shut the door, and for the first time in my life, I felt free. I thought evicting my parents and golden boy Jake would feel satisfying. That when I closed the door behind them, I'd finally feel free. And in some ways, I did. But what I wasn't prepared for was the fallout. Because my parents weren't just leaving my house. They were about to wage war. On the day of the eviction, I stayed home. I knew my parents would try something. At exactly 12 p.m., I changed the locks and had a friend install security cameras outside. And good thing I did. Because by 12:30, my mother was already pounding on the door. "Let us in." We're still your parents. I stood there, watching through the peephole, feeling zero guilt. Then my dad muttered something that made me roll my eyes. This is elder abuse. Elder abuse. Really? After months of freeloading, demanding I give up my bedroom, and trashing my house. Now they were playing victims? I didn't even answer the door. I just texted them, "You need to leave. If you refuse, I'll call the cops." And just like that, they left. But they weren't done with me yet. Not by a long shot. That night, I got at least 15 phone calls from relatives. Because, of course, my mother had called everyone she could and told them her version of the story. And according to her, I had thrown my poor, struggling parents onto the streets, refused to help my pregnant sister-in-law, treated my family like garbage over a bedroom. At first, I ignored the calls. But then my uncle, one of the few people I actually liked, called and said, "Look, I don't know what's going on, but your parents are making it sound like you're some heartless monster." So I told him the truth. I told him they had lived rent-free in my house for 2 years. They tried to steal my bedroom and give it to Jake. They tried to refinance my home behind my back. And when I told them no, they trashed my house. My uncle was silent for a few seconds. Then he sighed. Yeah, they left that part out. And one by one, as my extended family heard the real story, they started turning on my parents. After getting kicked out, Jake and Emma struggled. They had expected to live rent-free in my house for at least a year, maybe longer. Instead, they had to find an overpriced apartment in a bad part of town because they had no savings and burned all their bridges. Emma sent me a long, dramatic text, saying, "I hope you're happy. You ruined our chance at stability, and now our baby has to suffer because of your selfishness." I didn't even bother responding, because at the end of the day, that wasn't my problem. A few weeks after the eviction, my parents tried one last time to get back in my good graces. My mother texted me, "We miss you. Can we please talk?" I ignored it. Then my dad called. When I picked up, he sighed heavily. "Look, we messed up, but we're still your parents." I let him talk. I let him say whatever he needed to say. Then I simply replied, "You didn't care about being my parents when you tried to steal my home. You can figure out your own living situation, just like I did." And then I hung up, because for the first time in my life, I wasn't letting them guilt trip me anymore. For the first time in years, I had my house to myself. No more passive-aggressive sighs from my mother. No more demands from Jake and Emma. No more feeling like a guest in my own home. Just peace and quiet. And honestly, it felt amazing. After my parents and Jake were finally gone, I spent an entire weekend deep cleaning. They had left the house a mess. The carpets were stained. Guest rooms smelled like old takeout. I found food wrappers stuffed behind the couch. And in the kitchen, I found passive-aggressive sticky notes from my mother. Family is supposed to take care of each other. One day, you'll regret treating us this way. Jake deserved that room more than you ever did. I laughed, ripped them down, and threw them in the trash. Because you know what? I didn't regret anything. After I finished cleaning, I did something I should have done a long time ago. I redesigned the entire house. I painted my bedroom a new color. I got rid of the old furniture my mother insisted on keeping. I installed a brand new security system, just in case they got any ideas about trying to come back. This was my space now, and I was never going to let anyone take it from me again. A month later, I ran into one of Jake's old friends at a coffee shop. He grinned and said, "Man, your brother is still complaining about you." I raised an eyebrow. Oh, what's he saying now? Apparently, Jake had been telling anyone who would listen that I had ruined his life. He seriously thought he'd live in your house for years, his friend chuckled. He and Emma are miserable in that tiny apartment. Good. Maybe next time, they'll learn to respect the people who actually help them. My parents stayed silent for months after the eviction. Then, out of nowhere, my mother called me. I let it go to voicemail. But when I listened to the message, it was the same manipulative nonsense as always. "We don't have anywhere to go. Your father's health isn't great. Won't you reconsider?" I sat there, staring at my phone, and realized something. They weren't sorry. They weren't reaching out because they had changed. They were reaching out because they had nowhere else to go. And I had nothing left to give them. I never called them back. I never answered their texts. And eventually, they stopped trying because they finally understood. I wasn't their doormat anymore. I wasn't the kid they could manipulate. I was a grown man with my own life, my own home, and my own rules. And if they couldn't respect that, then they didn't deserve to be part of it. If I learned anything from this experience, it's this. You don't owe toxic family members anything. Just because they're family doesn't mean they get to walk all over you. And sometimes, the best thing you can do is walk away. I spent years trying to earn their approval, but in the end, the best thing I ever did was stop caring what they thought, because now I have my home, my peace, and my freedom, and I will never let anyone take that from me again.